Okay, well, welcome. Thank you all for coming. Good afternoon, and welcome to the first session of our year-long Hispanic Serving Institution webinar series centering Servingness. I'm Judy Marquez Kiyama, Associate Vice Provost for Faculty Development here at the University of Arizona. And I'm excited that our community today includes folks from across the country and our colleagues here at the University of Arizona. On behalf of Faculty Affairs and HSI initiatives, we welcome you to the U of A. I want to begin by recognizing and paying honor to the original inhabitants of our land on which the University of Arizona resides. This region includes the ancestral homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui tribes. We offer our gratitude in being able to learn today and share knowledge on these indigenous lands. Informed by Dr. Gina Garcia's extensive body of work on the concept of servingness, this webinar series features faculty and staff who engage in scholarship and servingness efforts that honor the cultures and the lived experiences of Latinx, Black, Indigenous, and underrepresented students and communities. And the goals of the series are threefold. By spotlighting current scholarship, we offer examples of the rich ways in which servingness is enacted by faculty and staff across the institution. And we invite others, both on campus and nationally, to learn about and engage in these efforts. And we build knowledge. Each month, we will address the question, what steps are needed to build institutional capacity around HSI servingness? The University of Arizona received its HSI designation in April of 2018 and is the first four-year public university in the state of Arizona to be recognized as such. In 2019, the U of A was among 9 higher education institutions to receive the inaugural Seal of Excelencia, awarded by Excelencia in Education, aimed at recognizing institutions that demonstrate intentional impact and success in the 3 core areas of work that Excelencia has determined to lead Latinx student success: data, practice, and leadership. The folks who you will hear from today as part of this webinar series represent some of the many individuals who've been engaged consistently in these intentional servingness efforts and who every day strive to create an even more culturally sustaining experience for students on this campus. HSI initiatives touch every facet of the U of A, from outreach efforts with our K-12 partners to faculty and staff hiring, retention and promotion practices, and to how we teach and engage students, to our alumni engagement efforts, connection with the community, and everything in between. It is the efforts of many that contribute to strengthening the U of A's commitment as an HSI, and faculty and staff, as you will hear, are central to those efforts. It is my honor to introduce 3 of those faculty to you today. Kicking off the first session in the series and sharing the presentation, HSIs and Community Partners, a framework for strengthening servingness through engagement. Please help me welcome Dr. Marla Franco, Dr. Guadalupe Guara Lozano, and Vignesh Subien. Dr. Marla Franco serves as the Assistant Vice Provost for Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives and led the U of A's effort to become an HSI. She's worked in higher education for nearly 20 years, championing college access and degree attainment for minoritized communities and underserved students, and has been nationally recognized for her commitment to minoritized communities and for her leadership with HSIs. Dr. Guada Lozano is the Director for the Center for University Education Scholarship, an Associate Research Professor of Mathematics, and Director of External Relations and Evaluation in Mathematical Sciences. As a mathematician, Dr. Lozano has been involved with K-12 and undergraduate math initiatives, including developing and assessing math curriculum and pedagogies. And Dr. Vignesh Subien is an Assistant Professor of Systems and Industrial Engineering and an Assistant Professor of Biomedical Engineering. Dr. Subien is a member of the Bio5 Institute, a distinguished fellow of the Center for the University Education Scholarship. His scholarship includes medical informatics, healthcare systems engineering, and broadening participation in engineering and computing. Together, they've developed the STEM and HSI Working Group, whose mission is to engage diverse units and stakeholders at the U of A and other Southwestern HSIs in developing an institutional sense of servingness at new and emerging HSIs. Their efforts work to transform STEM education at HSIs. Our presenters will share with you for about the next 35 minutes, at which point we'll open it up for questions. We'll monitor the Q&A in the chat throughout. So please help me welcome today's guests, Dr. Marla Franco, Dr. Guadalupe Lozano, and Dr. Vignesh Subien.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. We wanted to start this presentation by eliciting some of your thoughts, imaginings, ideas, experiences in connection to the topic at hand today. So we would like to ask you and use the chat feature to share with us. When you think of community partners, what comes to mind? And we would like you to share simply by using 1 to 3 words, whichever words you choose, nouns, adjectives, verbs. And we will give you a few minutes to look at this. Everybody can look at the chat. I will also scroll and share some of what I see there. So again, eliciting your thoughts as a segue into the presentation. When you think of community partners, what comes to mind? Collaboration, shared initiatives, expanding, reciprocity, K-12 schools, community-based organizations, religious organizations, inquiry and accountability, schools, mutually beneficial, authentic, public good, social service, student, families, classroom partnerships, share values, connections, internship partners, libraries, land grant, grant opportunities for our students, collective solutions, opportunities, strengths, goal, access, education, cultural wealth, respectful, local, sustained projects, neighborhood associations, co-educators, high schools, families, nonprofits, scholarship providers, businesses. These are all great. I'll just read some more, but you can scroll as well. Global, innovative initiatives, invested in students, and so on. So these are great. As we enter the presentation today, we wanted to elicit some of these words from you in order to segue into defining community partners for today's presentation and how we thought of them. So my colleague Marla Flanco will do the next slide.
Thank you, Guada. So thank you so much for engaging in the chat with us. I think that through this presentation, you will certainly see the opportunity to acknowledge your own set of community partners, perhaps that are specific to your own institution and your regional realities at your institution. To really kind of level set with this presentation, we wanted to establish some common ground around defining community partners. We in our chapter certainly identified that this could be any individual or group or organization within an actual or potential role in supporting student experiences and outcomes at HSIs. Also, those whose knowledge, interests, or stake in the advancement of Latinx students resides. Definitely, there are many examples of who community partners could be. They could be represented by these various types listed here, and you might even think about some other types of community partners outside of this. Things like university student centers, perhaps a cultural resource center, families within the community, elders within the community, local industries, professional organizations, nonprofit organizations, community groups, local government officials, chambers of commerce, perhaps neighboring 2- and 4-year higher education institutions, as well as K-12 school districts, which many of you had named in the chat. So a little bit of context before we go a little further into the presentation. We think it's really important to kind of set the stage, set the context around what U.S. higher education and engagement has looked like. You know, so really the relationship has wavered over time, sometimes being more congruent with community-based needs, and at other times being much less embraced. Although no, it's not exhaustive here in terms of the historical timeline, there are definitely some key time periods within the history of U.S. higher education that depict this wavering relationship. Through the 1800s, especially with the 1862 Morrill Act, we started to see an increased value for public higher education. We saw the creation of land-grant universities, for example, which were designed to respond to the agriculture and manufacturing needs of an increasingly industrial and market-driven economy. This was characterized by developing instruction to address the practical realities of society, to prepare the public for these professions, and to share knowledge discoveries with the public. During the 1900s, we started to see the scales tip in favor of knowledge creation and less about tending to the immediate social needs. As institutions' commitment to addressing community-based needs dwindled, the relationship between universities and their surrounding communities became a source of difficulty and frustration for both parties. Now, how did universities respond to these tensions? They either isolated themselves from the surrounding community, or they sent students and faculty into the community with limited sources and understanding for what the needs of that community were. In the early 2000s, we start to see interest in community engagement practices resurface because the Carnegie Foundation piloted a community engagement classification seeking to reaffirm the value for strengthening bonds between campuses and communities once again. And while this classification might be helpful providing a lens to evaluate an institution's practices for engaging the community, it likely leaves out the very things that you would be looking for to understand the relationship between HSIs and community partners. As a result, we developed the Latinx-informed framework for community engagement. I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Vignesh Subian, who will share more information about this framework.
Thank you, Marla. So this framework, as Marla indicated, can be used to envision and guide engagement with community partners. And I'll request Marla to navigate the mouse pointer as we go through the framework. There are three core elements to this framework: purpose, process, and outcomes. So I will talk about the purpose and outcome first and then go into the process. So the purpose here is more specifically a Latinx-informed purpose that is oriented towards servingness and intentionally take into account the strengths and assets of Latinx communities. Outcomes, on the other hand, of community engagement are those that are directly tied to the goals and products of this partnership between the HSIs and the community partners. So the outcomes might include increased participation by traditionally minoritized students or faculty. It could also mean improved capacity at the HSI or improved quality of life within targeted communities. The outcomes ideally should be asset enhancing. This could mean increased trust among the partners and improved servingness at the HSI. So finally, the core of the framework is the process of engagement between the HSIs and the community partners. And this is characterized by two dimensions: mutual benefit that you see on the x-axis and reciprocity. These are two words that you also put in the chat when we had the discussion early on. So mutual benefit is more focused on the outcomes for the partners. Reciprocity, on the other hand, includes a range of aspects, and this could include recognition, value of the knowledge and resources that each partner bring to the engagement. We could actually go further and say that reciprocity also includes cultivating trust and solidarity, and most importantly, long-lasting partnerships between the HSI and the community partners. As you can see from the four quadrants, varying degrees of mutual benefit and reciprocity gives us four different types of engagement between the HSIs and the community partners. One of the very first words that some of you put in the chat was collaboration. So collaboration is high mutual benefit and high reciprocity, for example. But the engagement can be as simple as connecting or consulting with each other, or the engagement that's more cooperative and ideally collaborative between the partners. So what we would like to do is go over some few practical examples for each of these quadrants and see how to apply this framework to understand both new and existing partnerships. So in summary, when the engagement between the HSIs and the community partners is grounded on a Latinx-informed purpose, and the engagement is enabled through a reciprocal process, the outcomes ideally become asset enhancing for students and faculties at the HSIs, but also for the community in the long term. So we'll start with a few examples for each of these quadrants. Marla, would you like to start with the first one?
Yes, thank you. So we seek to bring real practical illustrations to help demonstrate the practicality of applying this framework to examine community partnerships. So the illustration I'd like to go over briefly is when you have perhaps an HSI that has either a community council or some type of community board. So representatives composing that council may serve as key representatives or key stakeholders of the community. Really kind of overlaying the framework of what we're presenting today, we're going to address what the purpose is, what the process is, and what the outcomes are related to this specific example of connection. And so the purpose might be to provide updates regarding the HSI state of affairs to the community members represented in that council. And really kind of the process by which that happens is we would see participation between university representatives that are brought into those meetings or those forms of engagement, along with community council members. You might kind of characterize those engagements and interactions to consist of regular dissemination of information. What type of information might that be? So perhaps it's about sharing the HSI's kind of enrollment metrics, where they're at relative to retaining students or graduating students, or perhaps what their transfer rates might be. It might be about sharing information and progress towards student success initiatives, giving updates regarding the campus climate, perhaps sharing a little bit about the campus's COVID-19 mitigation plans to a community council, budget updates, as well as updates around hiring of key personnel. The interaction is mostly characterized by inquiry and exchange. So you might have university representatives presenting any of these types of updates or others. And the community council members are there seeking to understand and gain greater awareness about the HSI state of affairs. They may pose questions, for further detail or around specific timelines by when some of this might be achieved. But that perhaps may be the extent of inquiry and exchange that you might see. And so the outcome is we definitely might see this as an opportunity to have or establish a relatively informal connection between university representatives and community council members, as well as some raised awareness among community council members about the HSI's state of affairs. But this is really characterized to have low mutual benefit as well as low reciprocity. And one of the things that this relationship doesn't quite get at is that it does not engage one's partners in a process towards change, or at least not quite yet. So I will pass it on to my colleagues to illustrate some additional examples.
Great. So the second example is related to consultation, which you can see on the lower right quadrant. This is a hypothetical example in some ways, but it's also a true engagement in between an HSI, an urban HSI in the Southwest US and their local government. And the majority of the students in this HSI were commuter students coming from various suburban and rural areas in the region. This HSI has had several contacts with the local government in the past, but no tangible outcomes over the years. So as a part of their university's 5-year plan, they wanted to work more closely with the local government, particularly to map some research problems and needs in the community to the expertise and resources in the university. So the purpose here was to identify local research needs and map it to opportunities for research and learning among students and faculty. So to address this purpose, this HSI and the local government convened a group of county officials, research faculty, and students for a couple of annual retreats. And the county administrators would share their assessment of the needs and pressing problems within the community. And the HSI faculty and students, on the other hand, would share what their expertise and skills are and what resources they can bring to bear. They would then go through some form of matchmaking between the needs and expertise. So the engagement between the faculty and students in the HSI with the local government, as you can imagine, was largely transactional. And there is mostly information exchange, perhaps because it was a part of a strategic plan. So they wanted to exchange information and consult with each other as a part of the plan. The outcome, however, from the retreat did help identify some unmet community-based needs, which could potentially be translated into opportunities for research and learning among students and faculty. And I wanted to give one particular example of a tangible outcome. So the county and the HSI together identified transportation and access to certain communal areas in the region was very limited for certain populations in that area, which turned out to be a very relevant endeavor for students and faculty in the School of Urban Planning at the institution. So as a part of the engagement process, both parties benefited to some extent. Some faculty and students were able to relate their interests and expertise and directly contribute to a problem that they themselves face on a regular basis. And I want to remind that the big majority of the students were commuter students in this campus. The county benefited from having both real expertise and resources to impact change and improve the region's transportation and accessibility. But if you look at this partnership, this was mostly consulting in nature, and building trust and working together for longer term change is going to take time and genuine efforts from both parties. So in summary here, Marla, if you could click the next, yeah, thank you. So in summary, if you could, in this partnership has high mutual benefit for both partners, both the HSI and the local government benefited to some extent, but potentially low reciprocity because there's not a long-lasting relationship just yet, but they are headed in that direction. So we'll look at another example for how you can move to the next quadrant. Quara?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. So an example of cooperation, here I'm going to start at the top with the two partners. Sometimes we come to these examples or we reflect upon them by thinking first of the partners, sometimes first of the process, sometimes first of the purpose. So this is sort of a dynamic perspective on the framework and how to use it. So in this scenario, we might have, and this is actually based on an actual example, fairly current, a relationship, a partnership between a Latinx-serving K-12 school district and a community organization. The purpose for the partnership is to broker parent and community involvement in decision-making about high-profile and sometimes controversial public school policies. In this particular scenario, the community organization is brokering this exchange, this involvement, and so is the school district. Now, how are each the school district and the community organization taking part or enacting the process? So there's 4 bullets for process there. The first one, the help distribute district-wide surveys to parents, is something that the school district mostly leads or partakes. There's 2 particular things where the school district and the community organization and other stakeholders are co-facilitating. Co-facilitation of parent focus groups in multiple languages, specifically 2 languages in this particular case, English and Spanish. And the co-authoring of reports that might inform the district, the school policies, and the governing boards. The community organization is also in this process, as part of the process, acting as an independent agent to collect parent and community letters informing this decision. So if we think about this process, it's a process of cooperation. Both partners are contributing to the process. However, Marla, if you can click the next thing, thank you. Both partners are contributing to the process, but there isn't necessarily equal mutual benefit. There is high benefit to one partner, the school district, but perhaps less benefit in the short term to the other partner, the community organization. However, both partners share responsibility for long-term systemic change, solidarity, and servingness. And in fact, the particular community organization that is sort of serving to illustrate this example is a community organization dedicating to inspiring youth and families to be part of lasting community contributions and community change. So in this particular case, we have low mutual benefit in that the partners don't reap benefits quite to the same level, but we have long-term reciprocity, long-term commitment, solidarity, and systemic change intention from both partner sides, so high reciprocity. The outcomes in connection beyond the particular policy decision and tied to reciprocity have to do with Latinx parents and community voices being represented in public education policy decisions, and also, importantly, participatory processes being established for future leveraging. So both of these speak to aspects of reciprocity that are long-term, even though the mutual benefit is not so parallel between the partners. So in the next example, we will see how collaboration plays a role, the example of having both high mutual benefit and high reciprocity. And Vignesh will do that next example.
Thanks, Clara. This is one of our favorite examples. And this example really demonstrates a partnership, in this case, between a departmental unit at a Hispanic Serving Institution. And this HSI is located in an urban/university town where more than 50% of the population are Latinx. And the other partner is a large corporate industry in the area of agricultural automation. So both the HSI and this industry partner were interested in training students in a very specific area. Example in this case is agricultural sciences and engineering. And they wanted to retain them and help them serve the region. So they developed a very shared purpose of building and sustaining the workforce for the region and from the region. So to address this purpose, both entities came together and co-developed a graduate curriculum. It's not just the HSI leading the academic curriculum development, but both parties came together and co-developed the curriculum that is immersed in the community. Some of the courses were team taught with both a faculty from the HSI and a practitioner from the industry. And some faculty pursued externships or fellowships with the industry to get a better understanding of what the educational needs for the industry partners were. And then some practitioners even chose to split their professional time between the two institutions so that they could co-mentor the students during the program, and then after they graduate and become professionals in the industry. So over time, over years or even a decade, both parties developed a long-lasting collaboration that not only equipped and graduated students with skills that are much needed for the community, but also influenced the local economy and the culture by retaining the graduates in the region, and so that they could also stay closer to the family. Marla, could you click the next slide, please? Thank you. So such a mutually reinforcing and a collaborative relationship is perhaps most ideal, where both parties benefit from each other and more importantly, trust each other and share responsibility in genuinely serving the community around them. So there's high mutual benefit. There's also high reciprocity between the two partners. In the next example, we will see how an engagement can grow from one end to another. Engagement, as you can see, is always, there is a spectrum. And this particular example took many years to develop. But how can an engagement grow from one quadrant to another? That's our last example.
So in these examples, yes, as Vignesh was saying, the idea that partnerships are dynamics. And if you've been thinking about some of the examples that we've put forth relative to perhaps your own experience, you might think, well, I had a relationship with a community organization, but it wasn't quite cooperation as described. It was more ... And the reality is that the purpose, the outcomes, and the process all influence how to think about a particular partnership. So in this example, we have another sort of based on our own experiences example as a partnership between a 2-year HSI and a 4-year HSI, where the purpose of the partnership is coming together to streamline student transitions from 2-year to 4-year HSIs. There are issues connected to technical value of transitions courses at one institution and the other, but there's also many issues connected to equity for all students around transitions. So if the purpose is to streamline transitions, depending on how the partners come together to the process might enact a consultation or might actually rise to the level of a collaboration, and potentially it might start as a consultation and then rise to the level of a collaboration. So if we think of the more basic transactional exchanges, that exchange around streamlining transitions might be around consulting towards establishing or revising articulation agreements, the agreements that say what courses counts and how students might move through the degree. In that case, the outcome is formal articulation agreements and potentially structured course pathways. So in the slide, you have the process, the outcome, and the attributes related to the consultation level partnership highlighted in light yellow. In that case, the mutual benefit, okay, there's an error there. The mutual benefit is high. That mutual benefit arrow should be high, and reciprocity is low. Mutual benefit is high because both the 2-year HSI and the 4-year HSI benefit from this purpose and this partnership. The 2-year HSI offers courses that they can ensure transfer to the 4-year HSI or offer the students a process for understanding what will count and what to take. And the 4-year HSI allows students to transfer with a certain amount of courses and aligns their course offerings based on that as well. So again, it's high mutual benefit, both partners benefit, but reciprocity is low because there isn't necessarily an eye towards transformative change, systemic change, anchored on equity and Latinx-informed objectives or systemic changes. On the other hand, partnerships might evolve to a highly reciprocal partnership. And in this case, those are the bullets that are not highlighted in yellow. The institutional commitment from both ends, the 2-year HSI and the 4-year HSI, might be to commit faculty time release on both ends for collaboration aimed at long-term alignment of pedagogy, content, mentorship, assessment, and so on. The things that really form the basis for equity without compromising rigor in these transitions. In that case, the outcome is improved servingness across transitions on both ends, as well as novel networks for sustained faculty collaborations that are cross-institutional and tend to be fairly rare. In that case, we still have the mutual benefit of the consultation level example, but we also add reciprocity because this investment in faculty time on both ends towards supporting equity and servingness really aims towards solidarity, long-term systemic transformation based on Latinx-informed purposes. So this is the last example that we will do, and to get close to closing our presentation, we thought we would share with you some takeaways that we think might be of utility as you think about the framework or what you might do with it. So one of the first things that we want to point out is that the framework may be used to plan new and understand existing partnerships. The framework dimensions mutual benefits and reciprocity, which you all mentioned, some of you mentioned in the chat, may be useful for helping HSIs at various levels pursue intentional partnerships, to think intentionally about what a partnership might allow for, why we may want to forge a particular partnership, or whether we might want to revise particular partnerships towards serving a better Latinx-informed purpose. So all this is aimed at improving servingness. If servingness is our goal, our aim, then we can use the framework to give a new lens through the partnerships we have and through the partnerships we form. Another point we thought we would share is that HSIs should seek partnerships for systemic change. Servingness is about transforming institutions in a variety of ways. And this is part of Gina Garcia's work and her own typology of HSIs, which you may be familiar with. But it's about enhancing Latinx ways and graduating students. And accomplishing those things requires transformative institutional change, particularly at HSIs who can be intentional about servingness or should be intentional about servingness. So seeking highly reciprocal partnerships is useful for supporting servingness, aiming at solidarity and long-term alliances. Finally, we thought we would share that both partners, including the HSI, but not just the HSI, should keep a dynamic view on a particular partnership. Community partnerships tend to evolve over time, as we saw in the last example, not just in the way the engagement happens, not just in connection to the process of engagement, whether it's consultation, connection, cooperation, or collaboration, but also in connection to the purpose on that engagement. Purposes might change, stakeholders might change, outcomes might change. So thinking of partnerships as being dynamic and having the potential to evolve is also useful as we consider some of the things we've said today. And finally, to close and to respond to Judy Marquez-Chiama's request and her team's request to lead us all to think about next steps that we might undertake for building servingness capacity. We thought we would share something going beyond our takeaways from our framework and from our presentation. Our takeaways, while they offer some guidance for building servingness capacity by engaging new or re-engaging existing community partners, as we've said, they're also concrete next steps for building servingness capacity we'd like to share. First, HSIs and their units, and by their units we mean colleges, departments, so academic units, and also faculty, should probably be proactive in seeking partnerships that enhance servingness, intentional and proactive. Latinx-informed partnerships should be forged bidirectionally, and this is a big word, meaning both partners can initiate, both partners hold knowledge, guide, and deliver, not just the HSI. And this point goes back to something Marla said at the beginning about the history of community partnerships throughout time, and how HSIs tend to face things from them with a directionality that is in one direction, but not necessarily in both directions. To support bidirectionality, and second, as our second point or takeaway or next step, we put forth this particular point in our consensus report recommendations for transforming STEM education and HSI. That supporting bidirectionality means that HSIs should become outward facing as institutions. This means that HSIs have not just a disposition and desire to engage, but also offer increasing access to specialized HSI, Research One, and land grant resources towards community and partners. They face them out. They do not just leverage institutional resources internally. And finally, an important next step is that HSIs should commit to forging Latinx-informed partnerships at all levels. And by this, we mean all levels within the institution, but also all levels of partners. In particular, HSIs should value, explore, and commit to local and regional partnerships, not just state and federal level partnerships, which tend to be more predominant in this scenario. So with that, this concludes our presentation, and we will turn it back to the audience for questions, I believe, unless Judy has something else before we transition to questions. Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions next.
Thank you all for your presentation. You have lots of audience claps, I'm sure. We just can't hear them. I have a number of questions that I'd love to pose, but I want to make sure we open it up to Q&A from the audience. And so for folks who are joining us, you can pose your question in the Q&A function. And what we can do, we have a little bit of time, so we can go ahead and unmute you so that you're able to pose that question yourself if you would like to, or I can go ahead and read that. So if there are any questions from the audience, we'll go ahead and take those now. So is there a formal designation or criteria that goes with the description of Latinx serving K-12 school district? And this is from Annabelle Nunez.
Yeah, Judy, I can take that one if you don't mind. Yeah, so there actually is a membership affiliation with the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities that recognizes or names Latinx serving school districts. And actually, for those of you who are local to the Tucson area, Tucson Unified School District is one of those named school districts. But otherwise, outside of that membership affiliation with HACU, there isn't necessarily one that the U.S. Department of Education has. But I think it is, I think, an important dynamic or component of who HSIs deem as community partners. And definitely, I think thinking about your local and neighboring school districts is a very important and critically collaborative partner that can have both mutual benefit and ideally mutual reciprocity that should be examined, explored, and invested in.
I have a question from Lynn Duran. She is asking, what are some specific examples where the University of Arizona has used this framework in the community?
So I can start with that question, unless Vignesh, do you want to start?
You can go ahead. I'll add.
Okay, I just want to say, so a few of these examples are part of what we used in our presentation, and there's some more in the chapter where we wrote about this in connection to how U of A has used them. But I want to sort of say the framework is relatively new, and a lot of the examples that U of A has used or has been part of helped inform the framework. In creating this framework, we were in part unpacking examples that fit it. And I just want to say that the last example about the partnership between 2-year and 4-year HSIs is a particular example that it's been part of my work with one of the community colleges here in the region. That particular relationship at the level of collaboration, committing faculty release time from both the 2-year HSI and 4-year HSI is based particularly on that work. So it moved that transition phase from being perhaps transactional to being collaborative in the sense of having faculty work around together from both institutions in pedagogy, content, and mentorship, specifically to disrupt injustice, if you want, or infuse equity in transitions. And perhaps Vignesh will have another example.
I was going to add that, or amplify Guada's comment, that the chapter is relatively new, a couple of months, and the chapter has an elaborate description of a needs assessment project that occurred at the U of A 2 years back. And this framework was derived from that particular project. So the chapter has more examples of how to apply this framework.
Yeah, I also would like to share, I think one of the opportunities at the University of Arizona, I think that one of our approaches as a newly designated HSI in 2018 was very much right out of the gate. We wanted to make sure that we co-developed this vision around what it meant to be an HSI. Collectively with both UA community members, inclusive of students, staff, and faculty, as well as folks that were external from the U of A, perhaps alumni and community members. And so right off the bat, we had hosted visioning forums, and we held 2 of them immediately after we were informed that we were designated as an HSI institution. And not only did we take that as an opportunity to inform community members about what this designation kind of more technically meant from the U.S. Department of Education, but the greater portion of our time spent during those visioning forums was actually engaging people in kind of thoughtful exercises where we literally had mapping exercises where we engaged folks in helping us think about what kind of the core features were about the HSI we aspired to be. And I think that that was definitely something, a very intentional process of consultation that now, 2 years later has evolved and informed collaborations, I would say, that are much more perhaps representative of collaboration within the framework that we just shared with you. So there's definitely a myriad of ways in which we've kind of engaged and situated community partnerships throughout the quadrant. And it's great to see some of those partnerships evolve over time.
Folks have asked specifically about the chapter and where they can find it. Here's the book. So a little plug for the book itself. This is Dr. Gina Garcia's most recent edited book on HSI, and it's backwards, I can't read backwards, HSI Serving Institutions in Practice. And I believe the chapter is chapter 9, right? Other questions? How might community partners engage in the particular framework? So, I mean, some of the critique of community engagement work historically has been that we don't often enough lead from the community perspective, right? It's often the institution coming in and kind of playing that direction of where it needs to go. So how can community partners use the framework as a tool to make sure that their needs are being met, to make sure that the efforts are truly guided by community needs, maybe calls to action? Have you seen it being used in that way at this point?
So I just want to say something in connection to Judy's question, and then perhaps Marla or Vignesh would add to this. One of the things that we were, we saw as a kind of limitation when we were writing the chapter was that there wasn't at the time, given the timeline for it, an opportunity to really work anew without borrowing from examples that we were unpacking and had involved community partners to vet the framework with community partners. Now, it's an excellent point, and quite important, is part of what we're trying to articulate, that community partners need to be part of this conversation and, vet the framework to begin with, or give opinion, or, just sort of help reframe it. And this is something that we discussed would be an important thing to do. And when we've attended conferences that focus particularly in this topic, yes, we see that when those things are unidirectional, this is why we try to emphasize the bidirectionality. It's not just bidirectionality for the framework, it's even for creating these frameworks that bidirectionality is fundamental. So that is something that I think we want to do, and we have anticipated doing with some of the community partners that are close to much of the work Marla is doing now and others. That's what I'll say, and I'll let Marla take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really is an excellent question. And I think, with my colleagues here, it was really, I think, a great opportunity to write this chapter, because as we would write and as we would assemble together to kind of think through what the important elements and characteristics would be of a framework, what I appreciated most was literally drawing upon my interactions and kind of just channeling the engagements that I've had with community partners that have been so integral to informing how we lead this work at the University of Arizona. So there would be example upon example that I would be able to kind of bring to the table along with my colleagues who were bringing their own set of examples from where they're situated organizationally. And they really were kind of channeled in a way that formulated the structure of the framework. And I think also were very much integral to identifying the right types of attributes and characteristics that both entities would be and should be seeking in relationships. So it very much is, I think, part of how I practice and how we collectively are attempting to practice. And I take great value, I think, and pride and interest in wanting that to be very formative to how we envision this work.
As somebody who has chaired numerous dissertations from students who write about this topic, this particular framework I can see being used really informatively, not just in practice, which is key to this work, but as a theoretical framework in moving forward with really examining authentic community partnerships. So thank you for this. Really, I think it's going to be such an important tool. We probably have time for one more question. If there's anybody who wants to jump in.
Judy, I can make a comment as we wait for one more question, building on what Marla said and your comment just now. One of the things that I think frameworks like this might contribute to the HSI culture or servingness is that they sort of validate the idea that we might intentionally think about these things in a particular way. Sometimes that hasn't been in place, and opportunities that have arisen perhaps directly from the community have been sort of left to the side because there isn't a framework to fit it into an academic understanding or an academic partnership. And an example of that is I got a phone call from a community organization some years ago looking to see, because I had a Hispanic name, if I could tutor parents getting their GEDs for really having access to basic jobs in Spanish because they needed their GED and they had big demand and they couldn't speak English. And they wanted to see, and I said, well, let me see what I can do if I can find grad students, whatever else. I ended up responding at some point and just volunteering myself. But without the framework, it was haphazard, right? How do we fit something that can build an opportunity in this way? With a framework, all of a sudden this work is validated from the institutional perspective, and we might be better positioned to respond to these opportunities and seek others. So that's another particular example that might be useful to consider.
Yeah, I think I have another one to share. One of the signature hallmark programs out of HSI initiatives at the University of Arizona is our HSI Fellows Program. And it is a year-long immersive cohort-based leadership development program for faculty and staff to help develop greater capacity around HSI leadership at our institution. And one of the things that I make very signature to the experience is to level set those who are engaged in the program about kind of the sharing of knowledge and acknowledging even who holds knowledge. And so one of the intentional aspects of the program, of the year-long professional development program, is to bring in members from the community so that with them, alongside them, we are co-developing components of what professional development should look like as we cultivate strong HSI leaders at our institution. So identifying, folks that have perhaps maybe led community-based efforts, whether they're connected perhaps maybe to the arts or to STEM, or they run nonprofit organizations in the community, own galleries, might be elders in the community who have very vivid, active engagement around social justice issues themselves. And so it's been quite imperative, I think, to even get folks to consider, who those knowledge holders are and who to even bring in and inform and co-develop professional development opportunities within a university setting. So I think that's also kind of another illustrative example that comes to life through some of the practice that we're leading.
I was muted. Thank you both for sharing the specific examples. I know we're closing out and near time. I want to thank all three of you again for sharing such an important framework, sharing practice-based examples, and really leading the way in what these efforts can look like, not only at the University of Arizona, but across HSI institutions in the country. I want to also make sure to thank Monique Beltran, who's also on this. You can see her here. She is the running the magic behind the scenes and really has helped to make sure that everything has run smoothly. So thank you, Monique, for all of your help. The recording will be up probably within the next week or two, so you'll have access to share this with colleagues or with students who might find it beneficial. And I also want to remind you of our next session on October 15th at 1 p.m. Arizona time with Dr. Jessica Redis, Associate Professor in the School of Journalism, and she'll share about her work with bilingual journalism, a new master's program that's launching in bilingual journalism, and really focus on an interdisciplinary agenda for community service, pedagogies, and research. So please join us again on October 15th. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for coming.